Hello, I'm James Tucker. I'm a student at CIS 512. I'm going to take a little of your time to talk about Zachman Framework. The Zachman Framework is an enterprise architecture framework for enterprise architecture which provides a formal and highly structured way of viewing and defining an enterprise. It consists of a two-dimensional classification matrix based on the intersection of 6 communication questions: what, where, when, why, who, and how, with 6 roles according to transformation. The Zachman framework is an ontology, not a mythology. While the enterprise is comprised of roles 1 through 6, enterprise architecture is comprised of only of roles 1 through 5. The framework is named after its creator John Zachman, who first developed the concept in 1980 at IBM. It has been updated several times since. The columns represent various aspects of the enterprise that can be described or modeled, and the rows represent various viewpoints from which the aspect can be described. Thus, each cell formed by intersection of a column and a row represent an aspect of the enterprise model from a particular viewpoint. The architect selects and models the cells that are appropriate to the immediate purpose with the ultimate objective of modeling all the cells. The 6 viewpoints are the scope, contextual viewpoint aimed at the planner, the business model, conceptual viewpoint aimed at the owner, the system, logical viewpoint aimed at designer, the technology physical viewpoint aimed at the builder, the detailed representation out of context viewpoint aimed at the subcontractor, the functioning enterprise viewpoint. The 6 aspects in which they correspond are the data aspect of what, the function aspect of how, the network aspect of where, the people aspect of who, the time aspect of when, the motivation aspect of why. The scope contextual viewpoint aimed at the planner the first architectural sketch is a bubble chart or Venn diagram which depicts in gross terms the size, shape, partial relationship, and basic purpose of the final structure. It corresponds to an executive summary for a planner or investor who wants an overview or estimate of the scope of the system, what it will cost, and how it would relate to a general environment in which it will operate. The business model, conceptual viewpoint aimed at the owner. This is the next step, or the architect drawing that depict the final building from the perspective of the owner, who will have to live with it in the daily routines of business. They correspond to the enterprise business model, which constitutes the design of the business and show the business entities and processes and how they relate. The system, logical viewpoint aimed at the designer. In this, the architect plans are the translation of the drawings into detailed requirements, representation from the designer's perspective. They correspond to the system model designed by a system analyst who must determine the data elements, logical process, flows, and functions that represent business entities and processes. The technology or physical viewpoint is aimed at the builder. The contractor must redraw the architect's plans to represent the builder's perspective with sufficient detail to understand the constraints of tools, technology, and materials. The builder's plans correspond to the technology models, which must adapt the information systems model to the details of the programming languages, input-output devices, or other required supporting technology. The detailed representation, out-of-context viewpoint aimed at the subcontractor. Subcontractor view detailed specifications. Subcontractor work from shop plans that specify the detail of parts or subsections. These correspond to the detailed specifications that are given to programmers who code individual modules without being concerned with overall context or structure of the system. Alternatively, they could represent the detailed requirements for various commercial off-the-shelf or COTS, also known as GOTS, are components of module systems software being procured and implemented rather than built. The functional enterprise viewpoint includes data, function, network, organization, schedule, and procedures. Now, models or cells, the kinds of models or architecture descriptors, representations are made explicit at the intersection of the rows and columns. And an intersection is referred to as a cell because a cell is created by the intersection of a perspective and a focus. Each is distinctive and unique. Since each cell is distinctive and unique, the context of the cell are normalized and explicit per the perspective focus. The cell description in the table itself uses general language for a specific set of targets, below the focus of each cell in the particular framework. Eventually, the cells with the detailed representation give rules details for why, process detail for how, data detail for what, role detail for who, location detail for where, and event detail for when. There's a sixth role in the current Jacobin framework, but it is not used for enterprise architecture, while the enterprise is described by roles 1 to 6. Enterprise architecture is comprised only of roles of 1 to 5. Thus only 5 roles are shown. Since the product development, i.e. architecture artifact, and each cell are the problem solutions embodied by the cell, is an answer to a question from a perspective. Typically, the models or descriptions are higher level depictions or the surface answer of the cell. Refined models are designs supporting the answers are detailed, descriptions within the cell. Decomposition, i.e. drill down to greater levels of detail, take place within each cell. If a cell is not made explicit, define it explicit, undefined if it's implicit, risk of making assumptions about these cells exists. If the assumptions are valid, then time and money are saved. If, however, the assumptions are invalid, it is likely to increase costs and exceed schedule implementation. I would like to give source credit to Wikipedia and the Open Group. Thanks for your time. Goodbye.